The canto that we are in now is called The Parable of the Search for the Soul. And at the beginning of the canto, we had this, we read about Savitri in her grief and distress, awake in the night. A voice has come to her and told her, what are you doing, wasting yourself in grief like this? You have to find yourself, and then you will embody my force, and you will be able to conquer death. And it gives, that voice gives her the instructions, and she, at the end of section 1, that's what she does. She looks into herself, and she searches for her soul. And the first thing that happens when she makes that effort of inner concentration is that she's given a kind of dream or a vision which reveals to her the whole cosmic past, the whole process of evolution since the beginning of the universe, and how human beings have evolved, and how, watching all this process, there are calm eyes divine. They regard the human scene. Because we were told, no? Well, yes, another thing that she has seen, but we didn't read about it, was all the adverse forces in the world. We didn't read that, we left it aside. But we came to the place where Sri Aurobindo is telling us that all the world's possibilities are waiting in human beings in the same way that all the possibilities of a great tree are waiting in its seed. And what we read last time gives us a picture of our surface life, you know, the way we live on the surface, and we are not at all aware of our greater possibilities which are within. And now that is what Sri Aurobindo is going to tell us about next. So we're on page 484, and I'm going to start reading at line 373. It starts, but this, and this means all that he told us before, what we read last week. He says that was only matter's first self-view, a scale and series in the ignorance. This is not all we are, or all our world. Our greater self of knowledge waits for us, a supreme light in the truth-conscious vast. It sees from summits beyond thinking mind. It moves in a splendid air, transcending life. It shall descend and make earth's life divine. Truth made the world, not a blind nature force. For here are not our large diviner heights, our summits in the superconscious blaze are glorious with the very face of God. There is our aspect of eternity. There is the figure of the God we are, his young, unaging look on deathless things, his joy in our escape from death and time, his immortality and light and bliss. Our larger being sits behind cryptic walls. There are greatnesses hidden in our unseen parts that wait their hour to step into life's front. We feel an aid from deep indwelling gods. One speaks within. Light comes to us from above. Our soul from its mysterious chamber acts. Its influence, pressing on our heart and mind, pushes them to exceed their mortal selves. It seeks for good and beauty and for God. We see beyond self's walls our limitless self. We gaze through our world's glass at half-seen vasts. We hunt for the truth behind apparent things. Our inner mind dwells in a larger light. Its brightness looks at us through hidden doors. Our members luminous grow, and wisdom's face appears in the doorway of the mystic ward. When she enters into our house of outward sense, then we look up and see above her sun. A mighty life self with its inner powers supports the dwarfish modicum we call life. It can graft upon our crawl 2 puissant wings. Our body's subtle self is throned within in its viewless palace of veridical dreams that are bright shadows of the thoughts of God. You're going this way, Rosa? Yes. You will start?
But this is only matters first self-view. A scale and series in the ignorance. This is not all we are or all our world.
So what he's been describing before, this, our surface being, this is, he says, only matter's first self-view. Matter, material substance. We think that it's unconscious. But matter has given rise to thinking beings like us, and what he had described, what we read last week, is the way we tend to see ourselves. So in us, the material world is looking at itself. And that way that we see ourselves and our world with our surface consciousness, he says this is only the first becoming conscious of matter. no, in us human beings. And he says this is a scale, a step, a level in the ignorance. And actually there's not only one step, there are several steps, no, in the ignorance. But he says this way of seeing things, this is not all that we are. And the way that we see the world is not the whole of our world. There's much more that we are not seeing and not understanding. And in the following lines, he will tell us something about those larger things that we are not seeing, that we are not usually aware of. Yes, you'll read.
Our greatest self of knowledge waits for us. A supreme light in the true conscious was. It sees from summits beyond thinking mind. It moves in a splendid air, transcending life.
Right, yes, there's the full stop. So he tells us that that larger self, that greater self, our self of knowledge, not this self of ignorance, not this matter's first self view that we live in now. We have a much greater self of knowledge that really knows and knows the truth and the whole of what we are. And that greater self of knowledge is waiting for us. That greater self of ours, each of us has it, no? Each of us is that greater self, only we are concentrated here in matter, so we don't see it. That greater self of knowledge, he says, is a supreme light, and it is there in the vastness of the truth conscious world, the supramental world. So that self of knowledge, our highest self, it can see from much higher up than our thinking mind. You know, if we go climbing in the hills, the higher we go, the more we can see. So it's the same with levels of consciousness. That's a much, much higher level of consciousness than our thinking mind. And so it has a power of vision. It can see much more than we see with our thinking mind. It sees from these summits. The summits are the tops of the mountains that are higher than our thinking mind. And up there, the air is different. It's also true with our physical mountains, no? Our material mountains. If you go up to the top of Mount Everest, you're breathing a different kind of air from what you will breathe down here. And that air, he says, up on those summits beyond the mind, that our greater self is moving in a splendid air, full of light and delight. It is transcending life, what we know as life. There's a much, much higher form of life there on the higher levels, and our greater self of knowledge lives in that splendid air and moves there. Suresh.
Shall listen and let gets life divine. Truth made the world not a blind nature force. For here are not our large diviner heights, our summits in the superconscious sent place, are glorious with the very face of God.
Yes. So it, that greater self of knowledge, it shall descend, it's going to come down. It's going to come down into matter. And when it does that, it will make Earth's life divine. This is Sri Aurobindo's great teaching, you know, that the fulfillment, the end, the goal of the evolutionary movement is a divine life here in the material world. So our greater self of knowledge has to come down into matter to make Earth's life divine. And this is going to happen because actually this world, the scientists tell us that everything here has emerged from matter. It's true in a way, but he says behind that emerging process, there's a truth will, a truth plan, a divine conception. No? Truth made the world. The world has not been made by a blind, unconscious nature force. Whatever the scientists tell us, we don't have to believe that. Behind all those appearances which they tell us about, there's a divine will and purpose. Truth made the world, not a blind nature force. For here in the material world as it is at the present moment in time, you know, here are not our large diviner heights. We have higher levels of being that are in subtler worlds, higher planes. No? Our summits, the highest levels of ourselves, of each of us, they are in that brilliant light, a blaze. It's a very intense light and heat and energy. No? A strong fire blazes, or the sun blazes. No? In the superconscious blaze. Here we have mental consciousness. Below the mental consciousness, there's subconscious, subconscient, inconscient. But above, there's the superconscient, means what is above, no? And that is a great blazing light. And that's where the highest levels of our being are. And they are glorious, full of glory. They are actually shining. They show the very face of God, the true, real face of the divine. You'd read?
There is our aspect of eternity. There is the figure of the God we are, which yearns unaging look on deathless things. His joy is our escape from death and time. His mortality and light and youth.
So here are not our large diviner heights. They are there, no? Up in the superconscious blaze. There is our aspect, our side, the part of us that belongs to eternity. There is the figure, the form of the divine being that we really are. And that divine being that we really are, Sri Aurobindo says, he has a young, unaging look. He never grows old. He is always young. And that he has that youthful look at the world, and he sees everything with delight and enjoyment, the way that, and wonder, the way that small children do. He looks at deathless things, at immortal realities. That is waiting for us up there on our summits. And that divinity that we are will be very happy when we escape from this grip of death and time. He will experience great joy when we escape and find our true immortal selves. That's where his immortality and light and bliss live on the highest levels of our being. You'll read there? Yeah.
Our larger being sits behind cryptic walls. There are greatnesses hidden in our unseen parts that wait their hour to step into life's front. We feel innate from deep and indwelling gods. One speaks with him, light comes to us from above.
Yes. So just what we know of ourselves now, this matter's first self-view, is a very small part of who and what we really are. That larger being is sitting, it's always there, but it's behind these cryptic walls. We know what a wall is, no? But these are mysterious walls. Something that is cryptic is difficult to understand. No? So it is behind, we are not aware of it. In our unseen parts, those parts behind the walls, there are greatnesses hidden, all kinds of great powers and qualities that we are not aware of now. And they are just waiting for the time to come. Their hour, their time will come when they can step into the front of life. They can come forward and show themselves. But meanwhile, what we sometimes feel, we might feel some influence from there. We may feel some help. If we're in a very, very difficult situation, it might happen that we feel some kind of strength or guidance or comfort coming to us from these divine powers that are living. Dwell means to live, that are indwelling, dwelling deep inside us. Yeah? Sometimes, as happened with Savitri, a voice speaks within, inside, or a light comes down to us from above that gives us knowledge and understanding. So these are parts of things that are coming from our larger being.
Why he says as cryptic walls? Walls is impenetrable. But cryptic walls means
You know, if you have a wall made of bricks, you understand what it is made of and you can pull it down. But these are walls that are very mysterious. We don't know what they are made out of. We don't know how they've been made. And so it is difficult for us to do anything about those walls because they're a mystery to us. No? They are not physical walls. They are mysterious walls. Gumsun, you will read?
Our soul from his mysterious chamber acts, his influence processing on our heart and mind, pushes them to exceed their mortal selves.
Yes. So now he's going to tell us about different parts and aspects of our larger being. He starts with the soul, and then he speaks about the inner mind and the inner life and the subtle body. First he starts with the soul. The soul is at the very, very center of our being. It's there like in a chamber, like we have the chamber in Matrimandia. We can think it's a symbol in some way of that chamber where our soul is always sitting. And it acts from there. It's not just sitting. It acts. It presses, it sends an influence out to our heart and our mind. It pushes us to go beyond our mortal selves, these selves that have to die. The soul wants us to go beyond the limitations of our present physical and vital and mental formation. So its influence comes and pushes us. And in the next sentence, he describes what it's pushing, no? How it is pushing. Bhavana.
It seeks for good and beauty and for God. We see beyond self's walls our limitless self. We gaze through our world's glance at half-seen vasts. We hunt for the truth behind apparent things.
Yes. So the soul is always seeking for what is truly good, what's truly beautiful, what is divine, for God. It can't help, that's how it is, that it's nature to search for what is beautiful and true and divine. So under the pressure of the soul, we may see beyond the limits of our little mortal self. We may get a glimpse of our limitless self, our vaster, truer self. And it may help us to gaze, to look through this glass, which is of the world of appearances, like looking through a window. Sometimes the window is very dirty or very opaque, no? But matter, we can say it is like a window. To us it's not transparent, but the soul can help us to see through this glass of the world to half-seen vasts. We don't see very clearly those vast spaces that are beyond, but we may get a glimpse of them. And it drives us to hunt, to look for, to seek. A hunter always wants to catch hold of something. No? So the soul wants us to catch hold of the truth that is there behind the appearances. Then he speaks about inner mind, Mahalingam.
Our inner mind dwells in a larger light. Its brightness looks at us through hidden doors. Our members' luminous glow, and wisdom's face appears in the doorway of the mystical heart. When she enters into our house of outward sense, then we look up and see about her sun.
Yes. So this is another very important thing in our development, is if this outer being can get in touch with the inner mind. Normally now we're always in contact just with our outer mind, which is dominated by the sense impressions and by all the thoughts that are crowding in from other surface minds. No? But if we can get very, very silent and become aware of our inner mind, that is much vaster and it can reach much higher. Its brightness looks at us through hidden doors. In those cryptic walls, there are doors, no? And maybe they may open a little bit, and the inner mind may look out at us. And then we feel a kind of light filling all the parts of our being, our members. Usually it means the physical body, but it can mean the inner parts as well. If we are members of a group, we are part of it. No? So our self also has members, it has parts. So when that inner mind looks out with its light, we understand the parts of ourselves better. And even wisdom herself may come and stand at one of those hidden doors and look out at us. And wisdom's face appears in the doorway of the mystic ward, that enclosure, that cryptic walls that are keeping us closed off from that world. There are doors. Wisdom may come and stand at one of those doors. And if we welcome her, if we are open to her, then she may enter into our house, this body, our physical being, this house which depends on the senses, on the sense of hearing and sight and touch and taste and smell. She may come forward into this outer being. And when that happens, then we look up to see that higher light. High above, we may get a glimpse of the sun of wisdom. So that was the inner mind. Yes, this house that we live in, what is its characteristic is that it's dependent on the outer senses. In fact, that's what the senses are. No? It's the way that our inner consciousness communicates with what's outside our skin. Everything else we depend on the senses to tell us about. Of course, then the mind has to interpret what the senses tell. But in our outer being, this house of outer sense, then we are really depending on the senses and the sense mind to tell us what's around us. The senses are turned outward, not inward. In order to look inward and find out about our inner mind and life and subtle body, we have to move away from the outer senses and look inward.
This doorway.
Sorry?
Doorway.
Yes.
If you compare to gate, to door, to what is the door? How it looks like.
The thing about the doorway is that it has a threshold. And you step from one space into another space. So this space may be a state of consciousness. So there is wisdom, she's in our inner mind, but she may come to the doorway and look out. We may see her from the outer space. And then perhaps she steps into our house of outward consciousness. I think that's the difference. Well, there's not that much difference between a door and a gate. But a door is solid, no? A gate, you can see through it, but it may be closed. But a door is, usually you can't see through it. So the door has to be open, then she may stand in the open doorway on the threshold, and then she may even enter our house. This expression, a mystic ward. A ward is where somebody is kept, protected, usually. It's connected with the word guard. The two words have the same root. So in a way we are protected by those mystic walls, and she is also protected. So there's a doorway between the two. Tamara, you will read. Supports
the fish,
modicum, yeah.
modicum, we call life. It can break open or gravel
Crawl,
to
puissant
wings.
yes. A mighty life self with its inner powers supports the dwarfish modicum. A modicum is a little bit, and a dwarf is a very small person. No? So this modicum, this little bit that we call life, is really so small and restricted and limited compared with what that larger life self, powerful, mighty life self, that's supporting this little dwarf life in the front. This life that we have, this restricted life, couldn't exist at all if it weren't supported by the larger life self. And because that larger life self is there within us and supporting our outer life, it can graft upon our crawl two puissant wings. So 3 difficult words there, no? To graft. This is what gardeners do with fruit trees. They have a good strong root, and then they take a cutting from a very delicious variety of mangoes, and they graft it on to that strong root so that there will be a tree that gives good fruit. Or with roses, I think we can do grafting also. No? So here's this little dwarfish life. That greater life power can graft onto our little life 2 powerful wings. It can look like an angel's wings, that can take wings that can take us anywhere. At the moment, our life is so small, he says it's a crawl. Crawling is what babies do, no? Before they can walk properly, they have to crawl. And if you have to crawl, you can't go very fast. Snails crawl, yeah? So onto that crawling little life, the greater life can give us these powerful life wings that we can fly very, very high and very, very far. Uma.
God's subtle self is drawn within in its various pairs of veridical dreams that are bright shadows of the thoughts of God.
Yes. So we have this outer body, but we are not usually aware that we have a subtle body inside this body, a subtle physical body. And that is also much more powerful and more conscious than our outer body. He says it is throned within. It's like a king or a queen. It has a powerful being sits on a throne. It's there living in its palace, the palace of the king or the queen. It's a ruler, this subtle body. That palace, we can't see it. It is viewless. It's like invisible. We can't see it. And it is made of dreams, but these dreams are veridical. They speak the truth. Truthful dreams. There are dreams like that, no? We may dream something in the night, and it's a symbolical, veridical dream. It's communicating something true to us. So our subtle body is dwelling within this palace of dreams. Perhaps some of those dreams express themselves in the physical wishes and longings that we have. No? And he says these dreams are veridical. They are telling truths. So those powers that we dream of having for our body, one day we will have them, because that subtle self is there within us. Those dreams are bright shadows of the thoughts of God. They are some kind of reflections, indications of what God has planned for us, the divine plan for our physical possibilities. So we'll stop there for today. We can read together these lines, and I hope we will understand them better than we did the first time that we read them. But this is only matter's first self-view, a scale and series in the ignorance. This is not all we are, or all our world. A greater self of knowledge waits for us, a supreme light in the truth-conscious vast. It sees from summits beyond thinking mind. It moves in a splendid air, transcending life. It shall descend and make earth's life divine. Truth made the world, not a blind nature force. For here are not our large diviner heights, our summits in the superconscious blaze are glorious with the very face of God. There is our aspect of eternity. There is the figure of the God we are, His young, unaging look on deathless things, His joy in our escape from death and time, His immortality and light and bliss. Our larger being sits behind cryptic walls. There are greatnesses hidden in our unseen parts, that wait their hour to step into life's front. We feel an aid from deep indwelling gods. One speaks within. Light comes to us from above. Our soul from its mysterious chamber acts. Its influence, pressing on our heart and mind, pushes them to exceed their mortal selves. It seeks for good and beauty and for God. We see beyond self's walls our limitless self. We gaze through our world's glass at half-seen vasts. We hunt for the truth behind apparent things. Our inner mind dwells in a larger light. Its brightness looks at us through hidden doors. Our members luminous grow, and wisdom's face appears in the doorway of the mystic ward. When she enters into our house of outward sense, then we look up and see above her sun. A mighty life-self with its inner powers supports the dwarfish modicum we call life. It can graft upon our crawl 2 puissant wings. Our body's subtle self is throned within, in its viewless palace of veridical dreams that are bright shadows of the thoughts of God.